Hi there, I'm Danny Flexen. Welcome to the latest edition of SecondsOut FLEXpectations, our weekly look ahead into the world of boxing. We're here every Thursday at 4:30 PM, and this week we're going to be looking at some news that broke yesterday, although it does relate to events further into the future. Kevin Iole, a respected US boxing journalist, said he'd had an interview with Bernard Hopkins, living legend of course, now working for Golden Boy Promotions. And Hopkins suggested to Iole that John Ryder from Islington was likely to get the next shot, if you like, at Canelo Alvarez on September the 12th. Been a lot of talk to speculation regarding who was going to be next against Canelo. There's been offers that have already gone out. Billy Joe Saunders, of course, walked away from the fight, didn't have enough time to prepare, he said, and also wasn't happy with the pay cut caused in large part by the COVID-19 epidemic and ensuing shutdown of boxing for such a long time. Canelo fight is expected to take place behind closed doors. A few other people who've been in the frame, Sergei Derevyanchenko was apparently presented with a choice between either fighting Canelo at super middleweight or challenging Jamal Charlo for a WBC belt at middle, and he chose the latter, which you can't blame him for. He's a middleweight. And it's probably a more winnable fight for him for not too much less money. In terms of Saunders turning down the cash, it's not as much as you would normally expect for fighting Canelo, especially as Saunders would have been coming in as a reigning world champion at super middleweight. But we believe there's still around $2 million on offer to whoever fills the spot in the opposite corner to the Mexican superstar. So it's not money to be sniffed at. And we've seen a fair bit of criticism after Ryder was pegged as the frontrunner by B-Hop. A lot of people saying it's a mismatch. We'd rather see Canelo against a top fighter. Listen, in an ideal world, Canelo would be fighting Golovkin in a third fight. He'd be fighting Demetrius Andrade. He'd be fighting a Charlo, Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders. Sure. But with the money on offer, with the constraints around the pandemic, the ensuing shutdown, the fact the fight won't generate the type of live gate that Canelo usually does for fun, you've got to look at who's available for that price point and who's the best out of those there. And for me, I'm more than happy to make the case that John Ryder, and not just because I like him, not just because he's from London, but I'm happy to make the case out of the people that were in line for the fight and were being talked about, he is by far the outstanding candidate. So let's go through some of the other people first that were talked about. One was Anthony Dorell, former world champion at super middleweight, so there's credentials there. But he is, I think, 35 years old now, and also coming off a knockout defeat to another world champion at super middle in David Benavidez. So any opponent coming off a knockout loss isn't the greatest form line, if you like. And also the fact that he is getting up there in years. His best days are probably behind him, back when he reigned as a world champion. Another name mentioned was David Lemieux. We've come back to him quite a lot over this period. Exciting, aggressive fighter, style-wise probably well suited to Canelo. Only been up at super middleweight for one fight, more of a natural middleweight, so he'll probably be outsized against Canelo as well. And in that super middleweight debut against Max Bursak, he was dropped a couple of times, did win the fight, but was dropped a couple of times, looked in trouble on various occasions. So not coming off an outstanding performance, and I think still fresh in the memory is Billy Joe Saunders absolutely dominating him a few years ago. So again, far from ideal. Another two that I saw mentioned were Turiano Johnson and Jason Quigley, who fought in a grueling fight that was won on stoppage in the end by Johnson maybe a year and a half ago now, I'd have to check. Quigley's come back with a couple of good wins, but only against undemanding opposition. Don't think he's quite earned that Canelo fight just yet. And as for Turiano Johnson, yeah, it was a really good win over Quigley. His name value is not incredibly high. He has lost in the past. I think he's 36 now as well. Probably more of a high risk, low reward fight there. And then you look at Ryder, who is admittedly coming off a defeat, albeit a very contentious one, for a world title against a lot of people's picks for the consensus #1 at super middleweight in Callum Smith, WBA champion, Ring Magazine belt holder. Now, I had Ryder winning that fight, I think by a point. Some people had it going the other way. I respect both points of view. It was definitely a fight that could have gone either way. John Ryder did absolutely prove that he belonged at world class at 168 pounds. He's been there for a while. He is a former middleweight, but he's been up at super middle for a number of years now. Certainly more than natural middleweights in the likes of Turiano Johnson, Jason Quigley, David Lemieux. And unlike Anthony Dorell, his prime should be around now. He's 31 years old. He was on a great run of form going into the Callum Smith fight. He'd won 4 in a row, all inside schedule against decent opposition. It hasn't been stopped for about 5 years, and that was down at middleweight. He's really turned his career around, improved in a great gym under Tony Sims, and pushed Callum Smith all the way, whatever you think of the result. I think I looked earlier and it's like his last 3 opponents were all unbeaten going into the fights, and the 2 before that only had 1 loss apiece. So he's been mixing with hungry, promising fighters and getting them out of there for a large part, except for Smith, who he still was deemed unlucky by a lot of people not to defeat on the cards. In his physical prime now at 31, probably on his hottest run of form in his career so far, desperately wants to fight, been calling for it. You know that he will give it his absolute all. Style-wise, maybe not the most awkward style, however, not necessarily one that Canelo's seen much of before. You know, Canelo's great at adapting, he's an elite level fighter. However, John Ryder is a compact, aggressive southpaw. You don't see too many of those. He knows how to use his size or lack of size to his advantage. He knows how to get inside, work the body well. And he's quite cunning and smart. He's a veteran, a young veteran. And he's got a lot of tricks of the trade that may serve to unsettle Canelo. I think the issue he might have is that Canelo will be the bigger man, as well as being, incredibly skilled and talented. But he will give it his all. I don't think he'll get blown out in a couple of rounds. I know one criticism a lot of people have said is, well, look at what Canelo did to Rocky Fielding, and Ryder's last defeat was against Rocky Fielding. Let me just tell you, that was an awful fight. Decision could have gone either way, but it was just a tedious, laborious affair, lots of wrestling and grappling, and Ryder was still kind of getting acclimatised to that super middleweight division. He wasn't necessarily a full super middleweight at that point. And his styles as well, Fielding's aggressive, he's got those long levers but leaves himself open to the body, and what Canelo did to him wasn't a huge surprise. Ryder's a lot more compact, a lot more defensively responsible, while also making his own shots count. And the form he's going into the fight in is the best of his career, although so was Fielding's, of course. I think his style makes him a better matchup to Canelo than Fielding was. And I think it'll be a really, really interesting fight. I don't think, if I had to pick right now, obviously I'd pick Canelo, and I don't think Ryder would hate me for doing so. But I give him more of a chance than any of the other names that were on that shortlist. We're not going to get Derevianchenko or Golovkin or Saunders at this stage. But out of everyone else, Ryder, for me, at this time, September the 12th, is streets ahead of Quigley, Johnson, Lemieux, Dorell. So I think we should be grateful, instead of panning it as a potential mismatch, be grateful that someone was willing to step in at this notice to take the money that was on offer in compromised circumstances to allow us to see Canelo, huge attraction, back in the ring, and also someone that is going to give it absolutely their all, someone who's not going to fold after the first decent body shot he takes, someone who's going to go out on his shield or take it the distance and, will go in with a real belief that he can win the fight, whether you agree with that or not. But that's what I think anyway. I'd like to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below and I'll respond to some of them. I'll be back on Monday for Reflections, 4:30 PM, and next week, Thursday, for the next FLEXpectations. As always, really appreciate your time, and I'll see you all soon. Cheers.